Okay, let's continue now by looking at the fourth and these other qualities of what it means for us to develop a relational compassion and kindness, humility, and now, fourthly, gentleness towards those we serve. I've listed for you in your notes here some important passages that have to do with gentleness. These are passages that you can see describe Jesus, but also some verses about Paul here. Matthew 11 is a text that tells us something about our Lord. Someone once said this to me, and I've never been able to disprove it, and I think it's right, and I'll throw it out to you all. Said to me that this is the only place in the Scriptures where Jesus self-describes his character, his heart. I mean, he says, I am the door, I am the way, I am the truth, and things like that. But in terms of talking about relational qualities, this is the only place. I find that fascinating. I think that's probably true. Take my yoke upon you, verse 29, and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Gentle and humble in heart. There's an essential quality for a counselor, a minister. You must be this way. It's a fruit of the Spirit. It's something we see in Paul in 1 Thessalonians 2. It's something he tells Timothy to be. The servant of the Lord, 2 Timothy 2, must not quarrel. Those who oppose him he must gently instruct. Gently instruct. And Paul talks about that again in 2 Corinthians 10. Brothers, men, let me speak to you just for a moment, both in the room here and by online. If your definition of masculinity, if your definition of manhood does not include, at its core, in its essence, gentleness and humility, then you have an unbiblical, sub-biblical view of masculinity as God would define it. I'm not saying there aren't other qualities of masculinity that we can think at, and that's not the purpose of this course. I think sometimes we take cultural things and try to impose them upon the Bible. I don't think the Bible gives us quite as much gender qualities. Now, the gender distinctions are clear throughout, but exactly what are the qualities of the gender distinctions are not quite as clear in my mind. In fact, that would be true of this passage. This is not just about men, because Paul is saying the fruit of the Spirit is gentleness for men and women. But because our culture has tended to connect gentleness and humility with more of a feminine side of the equation there, I want to argue that gentleness and humility must be at the heart of all humanity, including men. So whatever machoism that we might attach to biblical masculinity, you make sure that it never misses humility and gentleness. So I say that directly to you, brothers. Let me make a comment to you, women, particularly if you're single. What are you looking for? We talked about this previously. We're looking for a hunk, right? A firework, okay? Whatever quality. We want a guy who's whatever. He's chiseled, all right? Pick your descriptor. That might be really cool in your early dating days, and all the girls are going to be jealous of you because you've got this great-looking guy, and, you know. I'm going to tell you 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years into your marriage, and when you have that little baby who's 3 months old or 3 years old or 13 years old, you're going to want a husband who's gentle and humble, not a star athlete or the most chiseled body or the coolest dude around. Okay. you've already be thinking about what God values, what God treasures. Gentleness and humility is a masculine trait that you ladies ought to look for if you're single, and pray for it if you're already married, if your husband doesn't have that, and teach your children to look for those things, to emulate those as boys, and look for those as girls, to find those in future mates. All right, that's my premarital training for you for today. Patience. It is very easy to be impatient in counseling. I want my counselee to change. I want my counselee to grow a lot quicker than they're growing. There's a sense in which I believe that we as biblical counselors are in more danger than a typical secular counselor, or even one who's more of an integrationist in the Bible use. And here's why. There are two things about a biblical counselor that could make it really an impatient thing to counsel. One is we really love the person. Now, I believe most secularists care. Most secular therapists aren't in it for the money. I think they have some kind of helping people thing going on. Some of you have done work in social worker here in the room, and others who've done that. You know that most of the people in that field care about people. They want to help people. But I'd like to think that we as biblical counselors have even a deeper love because of Christ's love for us. The second thing is, we've got the answers. They're right here. I've got truth. I'm not doing with this kind of this subjective, whatever works for you, or the latest theory, latest fad. I've got it right here. And here's what this means. If I had one of you, I would do this as an object lesson. I'll be the counselee. I want to do what? Because I love you a lot, because I see this is the answers for you. I want to take this Bible and do what? I want to shove it down your throat. I want you to get this truth. And every week goes by that you don't grasp this life-changing truth, because I love you and I want to see you continue down this path you're walking. You see how easy it is for us just to be impatient. It is so hard to be patient sometimes with people who are slow, people who aren't getting it, people who don't do their homework, people who don't show up for the session and don't even extend courtesy to call you or text you and say, I'm sorry I can't make it, or I'm running late. What's patience look like? It's all right. We'll reschedule. Baby steps are baby steps, and they're all good. And if you can't even take a baby step, you're at least looking in the right direction. We'll work with that. It's a very needed quality, patience. Forbearance. That's a word that is being lost in our English language. And I'm not one of those guys who feels we have to preserve King James language. I don't. But when you have a word like this that conveys so much, I really am trying to preserve that. So I'm doing that by including that in our notes today for you. Forbearance. The ability to put up with a lot. The ability to endure. There's actually two words in the Bible for endurance or patience. One is that idea of endurance under trial. But the other word is the idea here of relational endurance. Learning to put up with. Learning to not be easily angered. Not to be irritable. Not to be set off. Not to be short-fused. But to have a long fuse. Forgiveness. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Counselees will not only kind of irritate you, they're going to offend you at times. They're going to say things that are wrong. And maybe not in sessions 1, 2, and 3, but over the course of time, there might be some actual offenses. Love, that's kind of one that covers all this. I won't say anything on that one. Not envious. What might that look like in a counseling situation? I've counseled people who have a lot more money than I have, a lot nicer possessions. I can remember counseling when we had no children and struggled with infertility. We had the help of Clomid. I don't mind saying that. My wife is free to talk about some of the infertility struggles that we had. I can remember counseling as a man who didn't have children but wanted children, counseling dads and moms who had children, who were not parenting very well at all, saying to myself, Lord, why'd you give them children? They only know how to handle them. I know if you gave us children, we'd handle them a lot better. Of course, now we're back to pride, right, and humility. I don't know that, but I like to think that we would handle things a lot better than they were doing. You can be envious of people you counsel. Respectful. I've included a few verses here. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Now, Paul doesn't say don't rebuke, or Paul doesn't say don't minister, but do so recognizing his position as an older man. Same thing with older women. And then with younger men or peers or younger women, peers to you, as sisters and brothers, and with absolute purity. That's one of the ways, and we'll talk about this later as well, that we deal with the problem of men counseling women is recognizing that this woman is your sister. We'll talk about that. Or James 3, the tongue we use to praise God on Sunday morning in worship is the same tongue we use wrongly to curse people. So what does respect look like in counseling? It means having the appropriate relationship according to age and according to gender. Viewing people as people, image bearers of God. That's really one of the answers here. They've been made in God's likeness. Paul Tripp would put it this way: people are not sins walking around on two legs. Okay? People are people. I tell people, I don't counsel alcoholics or drunkards, if you prefer that term. I don't counsel adulterers. I don't counsel alcoholics. But I counsel Joe, who drinks too much. And I counsel Mary, who's committed adultery. You see the difference? I don't counsel categories. I don't counsel adulterers. I counsel people who commit adultery. People are people. They're not objects. In the counseling program, you're going to have to, in practicum classes, do cases. People are not cases. People are people. They have names. They're not assignments. I've got to counsel 10 cases. Let me find 10 assignments. No, you find one or two people, and you meet with those people 5 or 10 times, 5 each or something like that. Respect means I learn to affirm people. Thank you for sharing that with me. You know, what you just shared from your homework, that's really encouraged me today. Thank you for that. But, you know, that's a really good insight. That's a great question you just asked me, counselee. I begin sessions by saying something like this. Let me say 2 things right up front. First, I'm so very glad you're here today. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to help you. See, that's respect. That's saying to a person, you're important to me. valuing their opinion. There's been times when someone will ask me a question in counseling, and I'll say, that's a really good question. What do you think about that? This isn't a dummy. Now, they don't have the full answer, and they're a little confused. That's why they're asking the question. But it's not like they're asking a question that they don't have any truth already in their head. What do you think? And let's dialogue. And I can lead them maybe a little further than where they're at, or unconfuse them at one aspect there. Number 11, not delighting in evil, but rejoicing with the truth. Love does not delight in evil. What's this look like in counseling? Well, one thing is beware of listening to gossip. Now, when you're counseling one partner in a marriage or dating relationship, you're going to end up hearing things. But you just want to be a little careful. Maybe at some point saying, well, I think you've probably told me enough about how your wife has mistreated you. I probably don't need to hear a lot more. Now, I may just have to put up with it. The guy's still enraged and he's just venting. I get that. But where can I maybe slow that down a little bit? Or here's another one that maybe is more practical for us. Curiosity about the sins of people. I mentioned this the other day, that if I'm counseling a man who's been involved with sexual sin, there comes a point where I don't think I need to ask more questions. I don't want my heart beginning to admire his sexual sin or something like that. I think, Joe, you've told me enough. This is helpful. Let me now ask this question and kind of lead it a little differently. Number 12, protects and trusts. That's what love does. Love trusts. Love believes. Proverbs says that a gossip betrays confidence. Proverbs 11:13. A trustworthy person keeps a secret. Now, the trust that I'm talking about here is what we might call bi-directional, a two-way street here. First, I seek to trust my counselee. I make a choice, a conscious decision to trust you, unless contradictory information emerges. And when that happens, then I ask. I don't accuse. I humbly and tentatively inquire. I don't want to become cynical. Someone tells me something in session 1, and then in session 2 or 3 or whatever, 4, they tell me something that sounds different. Here's what I don't do. Wait a minute. You're lying. Or, that's not what you said the other day. No. Here's what you say. I need to slow down a little bit here. I'm a little confused. Now, hear the I messages coming out, class? I'm a little confused. I thought the other day, or last week, or 2 weeks ago we met, I thought I heard you say this, but I'm not sure I heard you accurately. I'm sort of overdoing the humility right now. I don't quite say as many words. I'm trying to make a point for you all. My mindset. Maybe I didn't hear accurately. And now it seems to me I'm hearing you say this today, and I'm a little confused. Help me understand what's going on. One of my favorite all-time TV detectives is a master at this. Now we're playing a little game, Guess What Dr. Jones is Thinking. It's a fun game we play in class once in a while here, okay? This is, it's all in reruns now, and some of you are too young to have ever watched it much at all, and the rest of you maybe never got into it like I did. This was a male detective who was a master at this tentative, humble inquiry. Have I given you enough clues? Who is it? Columbo. That was Columbo. I think Perry Mason had some of that. But Columbo, to me, was the master. So listen, here's what you do. If you've never watched Columbo, go to Netflix or wherever you get an old thing. Just watch one episode. That's all you need. They actually all have the same theme. You can do a thesis, probably, a master's thesis on Columbo. But there's just this one theme that's so very consistent. Columbo he enters with this humble, ragged look, and the bad guy always underestimates Columbo, always. And it's that underestimation of Columbo that allows him an in to get the information he needs, and then he reverses it. And at the end, Columbo's stupidity is vindicated, and the bad guy his pride is crushed, and he's off to jail. It's almost in every show there. But, he's like, ma'am, there's just one thing I don't understand. There's just one thing I don't understand. Humble, tentative, not assuming, not accusing, just asking good questions. That's what you do. But until then, you believe what you hear. Now, I believe what I hear, but I also know I'm only hearing it from one side. So if it's a relational issue and I'm only talking to the wife that day, I'm believing what she's saying, but I don't have the other side yet. And I kind of keep that in mind, so I'm a little tentative. I'm not drawing conclusions. Just because she says that the guy did all these things, I'm not assuming that he did them. But I also have this sense, in her mind, that's what did happen. And that becomes really important. Because I can't send a private investigator or begin to bug the home, and I'm not going to dig into their past by doing research about their past and interview their past neighbors or whatever. There comes a point where you take people at their word, and when you find contradictory information, then you ask. The flip side of that is eliciting trust, helping them to minister to trust you. And so, from our responsibility, we have to minister in such a way as to invite trust, to elicit trust. What's that look like from our end? How do we live in such a way to encourage them to trust us? Well, here's some things, some bullet points. Be honest about your qualifications. What you're not. You're not a licensed counselor. You're not even a certified counselor yet. You're not even a graduate yet. Don't give the impression that you're a graduate. I'm a student. I'm in a master's program. I'm studying things. I don't claim to have it all. But I love you and care about you and want to help you. This is true for me, even though I have, ordained in some certifications and degrees and all that. Even there, Bob, have you counseled people with eating disorders? Yes, but only a few. And if you're looking for someone who has vast experience in counseling a woman with anorexia, I don't have vast experience. I think I can help you. I've had a little experience. So you're just honest about your qualifications. Keep your promises. This is easy to do in the session, promise things. Hey, I'll send you an article. Hey, I'll bring you some booklets tomorrow, class. Well, they're there. Finally, right? I'll call you this week. I'll send you your homework assignment tonight by email. Man, I am like under 50% in getting that done that night. I will tell you. In fact, it's definitely under 50%. Now, usually within 2 days, I get the email to the person. But there's been days where I've given them an assignment that I want them to start tomorrow so that by next week they'll have 5 or 6 days under their belt of work. And here it is the weekend, and now there's like 3 days left. And I write, I am so sorry I failed to send this to you. Do what you can. Please forgive me for my failure. Keep your promises. You're going to photocopy something and bring it to the next session? You got to photocopy something and bring it to the next session. Honest about your failures. I've had a counseling case that kind of was ending when I was leaving, from North Carolina, that I did fail her. There were some times when I needed to reinitiate. This was pastoral counseling. Things aren't like sessions that open up and close and X number of times and the money runs out. It's more, you're just shepherding along the way. You're meeting and then you're not meeting and all that. And there were some times I just dropped the ball. I didn't meet enough. I didn't initiate. I didn't reply to an email quick enough. And, I'm not defending her. I think she was overly critical. And that was part of her problems in her life that she was dealing with. That's my belief. And others affirmed me on that point, others who were shepherding her. But that still didn't excuse me for my failures. And I had to ask her to forgive me. And I had to ask her to forgive me on 2 different occasions. And on the last occasion that happened, I had to say, I understand that I may have lost your trust. I don't know if this is redeemable from your end. I'm committed, and I'm going to keep working with you if you'll allow me. But if she had bolted at that point, had given up on me, I think she would have been wrong, but I wouldn't be hard on her. I get it. I understand. I've lost some trust, and I've blown that one. And then, of course, biblical confidentiality. I'm committed to your best. What we discuss stays between us. Now, that's my little rhyme in my head. I don't always say that. But the mindset here is this stays confidential unless there's a biblical reason to disclose something. Unless I'm constrained by God, which would mean morally, ethically, by God's word, and of course, we're in the government that God has placed over us, Romans 13, legal requirements of reporting. If you're heading into military chaplaincy or I don't know as much about hospital or prison chaplaincies, but if you're heading into military chaplaincy, you have a little more confidentiality than if you're just kind of doing this in a state license kind of thing. I think within the church, I tend to be kind of similar to the way the state. There are some pastors who are going to argue for the clergy, historical clergy, penitent confidentiality. I generally discourage you from going down that path. The mentors in my life have done the same, have discouraged me. What do I mean? In the classic Roman Catholic type penitential thing, someone confesses murder. You cannot break that confidentiality. In my world, criminal things may need to be reported. Murder becomes sort of an interesting one that may not actually be in the state guidelines for a counselor. But obviously abuse of children, of minors, is reportable. Elderly abuse is reportable. In some jurisdictions, perhaps not so much drug use, but drug dealing might be. What you need to do here is know your state statutes. But what you also need to do is talk with your church leadership if you're ministering under the authority of the church, as a member of the church. If you yourself are a pastor in the church, then you talk with your fellow pastors. If you're an associate pastor, you talk with your senior pastor, your lead pastor, the person whom you report. If I'm going to be hired on as a new pastor or a new women's ministry coordinator, this applies to any staff position, men or women, what I'm about to say, I think on day one of your hiring, and maybe even in day before you get hired in your final interviews, you'd be wise to ask some questions about some hypothetical situations. Now, I'm new on staff with you, Pastor, here, and I want to be faithful to God and His Word. I want to shepherd the people in our congregation well as the women's ministry director. But I also know that in doing that, there's going to be occasions where I might learn some things about child abuse going on in that home. I might learn some things about other illegalities going on, or I might learn things about someone is divorcing or is filing for divorce. You don't know about these things. Pastor, what are the confidentialities that you think I should have? And if he's not sure, then that's an occasion for you and him to think together and get some counsel from other churches. Christian organizations, counseling organizations, contact me, all right, as one of your props. Peacemaker Ministries has specialized in this area as well. There's other Christian defense funds and organizations out there. You're going to do some research there, and you need to be on the same page. One of the things we learned as a culture, I hope, from Penn State University problems with the child abuse there that was not only alleged but proven, and where there was imprisonment. One of the things we learned from that is it's not enough for your superior to tell you that he'll report it. If I have a thing that needs to be reported, I'm an associate, or a member of the church counseling, and I learn about something that is a child abuse situation, and I tell my boss, so to speak, my supervisor, the lead pastor, and he says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." You learn from Penn State, no. Pastor, I appreciate that, but I feel a personal obligation that I need to do the reporting here. Now, maybe we can just do it together. Let's get on the same phone, would be fine. Or I don't mind if you do it, Pastor, but it's not that I don't trust you. It's just that legally I believe I'm liable here. I would like you to do it. Can I sit in the presence while you make the phone call so I can be assured that it's been done? There are things called cover-ups, okay? And one of you asked, I won't say it on video here, but one of you asked about a denomination that had a struggle not long ago. And I think this is an example of, I don't know what was covered up or not covered up. I don't know how these things were handled. I haven't delved into those issues there. But I would just say to you, let's use a lot more care and caution than I think historically we've done as a church. I've given you here some recommended language about confidentiality. First, some things that come from Peacemaker Ministries. I really like what Peacemaker does because they have a real positive statement, an entire paragraph of several sentences. And the concept of what we try to guard, we're trying to protect confidentiality. That's paragraph 1. And I like the language there. Paragraph 2 is where confidentiality will need to be broken, the exceptions to confidentiality. And they give a list of 4 bullets there. The one that I use, and I keep saying I need to do this, and maybe I will, is probably expand my first paragraph, which is just 1 sentence, and kind of add some of the Peacemaker positive language in there. But it's my second sentence, or second paragraph, that gives you some of the confidentiality stuff. And notice I'm using the phrase biblical and civil law. Cannot guarantee absolute confidentiality in every situation. I'm not a Catholic priest, is what I'm saying to you. I may need to discuss your situation with appropriate leaders of your church. Now, this is not something in a licensed world that you would include. That would go beyond. That would be a breach of confidentiality. But since I'm doing this in a church-based world, I may need to ask for that freedom. If there's a divorce going on of my counselees who belong to another church, and I think the church needs to know so that they can help intervene and save the marriage, well, that's part of the informed consent agreement. My counselee, in coming to me, signs this agreement, which allows me, with my own discretion, to call their pastor if I think I need to. May divulge him to appropriate civil authorities. There's indication that you or someone else might otherwise be harmed. That's a little generic. Doesn't necessarily state the crimes. Giving myself a little bit of leeway. Based on this language, I would feel free to confront the guy and say, you're dealing drugs. It's different than you're just smoking pot. You're dealing. And you're dealing to minors. And if that happens, I might feel constrained. I might. I'd pray. I'd certainly get some counsel. Here's the beauty of having a plurality of elders, plurality of fellow pastors. If you're in a solo church, get some counsel from another pastor. But you have to make the final call. So you or someone else might be harmed. You might be harmed, so that's my suicidal component of that, if I think you're suicidal. Or someone else, if I think there's violence being done. And then, of course, if I do counsel children, then I have the freedom to divulge what I think I need to the parent or legal guardian. The next component there is I ask you to agree not to discuss our counseling with people outside the counseling process. I don't, not usually a big concern, but just like I'm not going to go telling everyone about what you do or what you report to me. I don't know if it's wise for you to go quoting me. My counselor said, my pastor said, or whatever. That's minor. The other one gets a little more important. Where your situation might involve legal issues, you must agree to treat all dealings within regard to this dispute as settlement negotiations. That's kind of more of a legal language. I get this from Peacemaker Ministries. Which means they'll be inadmissible in a court of law or for legal discovery. Further, you must agree that you will not try to force them to divulge any information required during counseling or to testify in any legal proceeding related to this discipline. What do I mean here? There is a serious marriage case going on here that I'm counseling, and the parties end up divorcing, and they go to court, either for the divorce or maybe a child custody component, a discussion there. And they want me to come testify. One of the mistakes that pastors can make at this point, I think it's a mistake, is by not having this kind of informed consent up front, they share with you about adultery. Let's say the husband confides in you that he's been adulterous. He hasn't told his wife yet. You go and you tell the wife because he won't, or you tell someone else, you could be setting yourself up here for a breach of trust, a breach of confidentiality. Another kind of situation is if they are at war and going to court and they want you to testify on one party's behalf. This confidentiality says, first of all, you're not going to compel me to do that. And secondly, I can't do that unless both parties agree. But even if both of you agree, I'm still not obligated. Now, these are civil cases. I've had a case or two where the sheriff's office contacts me. I was counseling a woman who had been she was in her 30s, she had been sexually violated by her dad when she was a girl. All statute of limitations was over on that, and she didn't want to, get into that, and that was fine. I counsel her how to handle this now. However, her dad, during the time when I was counseling her, was caught molesting a boy in a public place at a pool, summer pool setting there in the county. And now they interviewed the daughters, and the daughters said, well, this man had done this to me when I was a girl, and they weren't going to press those charges. Statute of limitations over. But they wanted my counseling notes, and so I turned them over to the authorities. But on another occasion, I get a phone call from a couple that I had counseled where the marriage was ending in divorce, and it was her attorney on the phone saying, I'm calling you to tell you that we intend to subpoena you to appear on behalf of my client to talk about the marriage. So I've got a phone in my ear. And as that phone is in my ear, I hear this man and name the person. What am I doing? I'm walking over to my file cabinet. I'm pulling up my file forms. I pull out their folder. I pull out the confidentiality agreement. And I say, sir, I don't know if your client has told you this or not told you this, but I have in my hand, and I'd be happy to fax it over to you, a signed, informed consent agreement that explicitly says that I will not be subject to court and to being subpoenaed. What was the reply? Oh, I didn't know that. Click. End of the discussion. Now, I am not a lawyer. Much of what I'm saying does come from legal people, but I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to be clear on that with you. Don't take my word for these things. I'm just giving you a perspective. You may need to check that out. You may need to discuss that with your other church leaders, talk with an attorney. I will tell you, church leaders tend to be very fearful, which is why many have gotten rid of the word counseling. And as I said the other day, it might have just been with the live class students here at this moment. That's sad for me personally. I think that counseling is a term that's not a technical term. I think we continue and should continue to use it in our churches and our parachurch Christ-centered biblical counseling ministries, as long as you guard it very carefully what you mean and what you don't mean. You need to be very clear that you are not state licensed. You are not state licensed. You're not using psychological principles, the standards of the culture. You are Christ-centered, ministering under the authority of your local church in carrying out Christian ministry and discipleship with people. If you have that kind of language, I think you're going to be fairly safe, and you don't do stupid things. All right. Pastors can't be sued for malpractice because that assumes there's a standard of practice that dictates how pastors should do their thing, and there isn't. It's not like the American Medical Association where malpractice is defined by a standard that exists. But it doesn't mean you can't be guilty of breach of confidentiality or things like that. So don't punt away the word counseling, and I think it's a step back to call your church ministry soul care. So some will disagree with me, maybe even on campus here, so I'll just tell you my view. I think soul care is going to be a weaker term, and let me tell you why. Well, first I said legally I don't think you have to get rid of the word counseling as long as you define it properly. Secondly, when a couple in your community is having serious marriage problems, who are they going to go to? A counselor or a soul care provider? That soul care thing sounds way too mystical, too spiritual for an average person. I think they go to a counselor. The doctor's going to say, with someone with anxiety, you should go talk to a counselor, not go find a soul care specialist. Okay. Now, I'm not mocking the term. There's actually, and those who prefer that term argue, and I agree with them, there's a rich history of the phraseology of soul care. And you can date that back, and it predates counseling language for what churches do. So in that sense, you've got history on your side. I grant that readily. I'm just thinking more in terms of how we're going to reach people in our church and in our community, and why are we going with soul care instead of counseling. In my mind, it's primarily because of legal fears. And I'm saying drain the legal fears and now put it on this level playing field. And I think the word counseling would be very helpful and a preferred word. So, again, there's a lot of room for disagreement. I'm sure there's going to be colleagues here who would differ with me, and that's okay. It's room for good discussion. But we won't have that good discussion now because this segment has gone much further than I intended it to be. And the only other quality here noted is perseverance. Let me take us a few more minutes on a long segment and say that this last quality, 13, perseverance. Ministry is a marathon, not a sprint. You've heard that before. And particularly if you're doing church-based counseling, where it's not a matter of a number of sessions and appointments, and when the money runs out, the counseling ends, in many of the professional therapy settings. In church-based, you're going to counsel people, and you may cease counseling, but you're going to see them on Sunday, and you might resume counseling. It's more of a relational over the course of time, and that person pulls away from counseling. If I'm a professional counselor, I might make a follow-up phone call to see what's up. If I'm in the church and they pull away from counseling, I'll make not just one, but probably several. And along the way, I'm going to look for them on Sunday. How are things going? How can I help you? My door's open. You're going to have that ongoing contact as part of the body of Christ.